Hello, hello, welcome to, yes, Other World Connections. And, yeah, you're tuned into, this show on Revolution.radio on Studio A. And it's 3 minutes past 10 p.m. Eastern Time. On a Thursday, and down here on the Central Plateau of the North Island of New Zealand, it is 3 minutes past 4 p.m. on a Friday. And it's warm and sunny, and there is no breeze or wind or anything. It's the most pleasant day we've had since winter. We didn't have spring, we just had winter and then what feels like summer. And there's an irate wasp. I've got the door open. One of the conundrums of the vegan community, well, it should be, should you kill wasps? And what about slugs in the garden? They gotta go. I'm sorry, they have to go. You know, vegan or otherwise. You can't have slugs ruining your crops. You can't have wasps setting up shop and stinging all the men, women, and children around. Anyway, that's my 2 cents. I'm not going to kill that wasp, but we will deal to his nest. So I'm just, an honest vegetarian. And a big hello to Metal Rabbit in the chat. Blessed with his presence once again. What am I doing right? Oh. Yeah, wishing your shoulder. Oh, rheumatic shoulder. Oh, my goodness. Well, I hope, you find a way through that. Too much hard rocking and rolling. Shredding on the guitar, I suspect. That's no good for the shoulder. That ultra-fast picking. I'm stuck on the starting soon. Yes, that's correct. Here I am. Oh, gosh. You can't get it right all the time. You can't get it all right all the time. But there I am. There's video. What was I going to say? Anyway, the reason I was going to say all what I said is, well, first off, hang on. Get it right, Gino. Get it right the first time. This is Revolution Radio. It's a listener-supported radio station, which means you have to pay. I'm just kidding. But the amazing thing about Revolution Radio is that listeners actually donate. So, we have to do that little plug, and fair enough. And that's really amazing. So thank you for your support. Everyone out there in internet radio land, wherever you may be. And that's pretty amazing. And so revolution.radio, the website, provides you on the homepage with many ways in which you can donate. And a pretty cool way to donate is to buy an advertising banner for the paltry sum of $25 US per month. Gets a lot of eyes on that, that's for sure. So yeah, why not? So there you go. That's the little plug. Please, and also thank you to everybody out there that supports Revolution.radio and operating through Discord now. So if you go onto the website, you can join the Discord server and enter the chat and make comments or otherwise. And the eagle flower there. I'm just on the other chat now. Says it's that time again. Indeed, it is. Kind of the only time in the week that I can really manage to pull this off at the moment. Metal Rabbit says a Bronze Age, the age of the Celts. Give slugs beer. Yes, watching them debauch themselves to death in a pot of warm beer. I don't know. It's not as sadistic as it sounds. They have a heck of a time going out. They really do. Oh my goodness. Sometimes they drink more beer than we can give them to put them out of our misery, if that makes sense. And so, yeah, We just drown them. Sorry, sluggies. But you sickos have to go. You're just destroying. But eventually, we reach an equilibrium. And an equilibrium is where we want to be living. And so, this is just trying to bring things back to balance, I'm sorry to say. Yes. Okay. So, we got Metal Rabbit on the team who already shares some knowledge of the Bronze Age as the age of the Celts. Yeah, lucky to have you around. Yes, that's right. I was talking about wasps. So there was a wasp in here, and a news story in New Zealand is that we have an invading hornet that has come in. No clue or suggestion as from where, which must mean it's from a non-white people country. It shouldn't really matter, because people are naughty everywhere and they try to bring all kinds of things into New Zealand and claim ignorance. I don't know why. And I'm not saying it came from China, but if you watch those airport security reality shows, you know, where they follow the camera around the airport and they just catch people with, cocaine or a banana. Well, in New Zealand, I think they treat you more seriously with a banana than with the cocaine. They're super serious on biosecurity here, as they are. They're pretty hardcore in a lot of places, right? That New Zealand tries to make out they are super hardcore. So you get like, obviously we're kind of close to Asia, and we get a lot of, people bringing in like, I don't know, live bats for the barbecue and stuff like that. Anyway, I've just got to do this relaxed. I've got to have fun as well myself. So, the hornet. A hornet has come in. And let's just get this right. Hornet found in New Zealand. And there are memes going around of the team. They're pretty dry, but they are kind of hero worshipping this team of biosecurity agents going around trying to find the hornets, just, hitting the streets like Ghostbusters, but with no leads. They're just like, hey, where's the hornets? It's a yellow-legged hornet. 15 queen yellow-legged hornets in the Glenfield and Birkdale areas. Sorry, very Chinese area. Just saying. I just say North Shore, Auckland, China. With 10 of these queens. But, it would be racist to say it's only them. It's people bad everywhere, but it's just that we get more Chinese coming and bringing things. And they have exotic tastes, right? To say the least. So, yes. And Julia's here. Julia's here with the fly swatter. I should turn the camera around. She's looking for the hornet. It's a pretty nasty looking thing, actually. I think he's gone back out, but where I'm transmitting from is the back of a garage. It's like it's basically a man cave, but there's a carport, a long awning, and that's where the wasps like to set up. And Taumarunui, this tiny little small farming town, for whatever reason, has a wasp issue. Just perhaps the climate, or just the ruralness or the farming aspect of it. I don't know. Just creates a lot of hornets. My theory is that not hornets, wasps, but the more wasps there are, the less. What do you say to that, Julia? The more wasps there are, the less biodiversity there is. We're surrounded by monocropping pine forests. If you have a wonderful, lovely, diverse garden and everything's all running on all cylinders, you don't have to be out there trying to kill slugs. There are some wasps, but they're not just like all wasps. There's mostly bees. All that stuff is in a balance. And when it's not in balance, just some things are going to have to die. They're just going to have to until we work it out, right? So, yeah, we don't eat meat, and we're kind of ostracized from all communities because we don't just like put every living thing up on a petting stool up on a pedestal. A petting stool. Well, I'm not putting a wasp on a petting stool. And, so we're just balanced. or try to be. Yeah, and this season the wasps are setting up shop near the house, which made me think of this queen hornet invasion of New Zealand, which is happening. At least that's what the media is putting out. But I just want to go to hornet, spiritual meaning and symbolism. Let's just put that up on the screen just for fun, because this is really what I do. I am a weirdo like this. The hornet spirit animal encourages you to be bold and assertive in your actions. It teaches you not to be afraid to defend yourself or your beliefs. The hornet also signifies the importance of working together with others to achieve common goals. And you know, that is, oh, here it is, Julia. Oh, he's angry. I may get stung live on air. I'm not gonna get out of there, you bugger. Get out. Oh, he's landed on me. Don't move. I don't know, it's not that fun getting a wasp sting. Bee stings are alright, you can live with them. But wasp stings, you're just itching like a mad dog for weeks. Furious itching all through the night. So, anyway, I just thought maybe there was something in that was for the collective, at least for the country. Being bold and assertive in your actions. Well, it teaches not to be afraid to defend yourself or your beliefs. Well, this is the ongoing theme. He's back in here. That's the ongoing theme with like just life in general, especially down here, about sticking up for yourself. The self-defense principle, just the rule of just looking after yourself, protecting yourself from harm, and also, beyond that, being a protector or a defender of others. That's a big problem. That energy is stamped out. That dynamic is stamped out in the early years. That's sort of all part of what I do here on this show, and obviously the kids show. That's what it's all about, getting people to, stick up for themselves and be themselves and fight for that. And, hornet symbolism, perhaps that, is a bit of an augury there. Perhaps. Especially because it's been brought in, and, that is one of these, topics of the day at the moment with, mass migration, and globalism. That's all globalism. So, New Zealand is especially a country, like a lot of Commonwealth countries, that are essentially entrained to revere other cultures. Roll out the red carpet for whoever and whatever. And it's really nice to be welcoming. And people notice that. Young people, when they go travelling, young Kiwis, and then they go overseas and they're like, oh, they're not very welcoming here. And it's like, well, no one's really welcoming everywhere because you're not from there. And I don't know if I necessarily mean that that's okay and how it should be, but here it's it really is turn the other cheek. And I'm not talking about the cheek on your face. Oh, I make myself laugh. So I just wonder if the hornet is just a little augury as a reminder, hey, perhaps, and this is part of why we're looking at Indo-European things, I'm sorry to say. This is why I'm looking at fairy tales. I think there is a correspondence between wokeism and, things like fairy tales being made obsolete or being completely rewritten to remove anything of substance that is really what is related to Indo-European culture, that further fans the flames of the idea that me, as a Indo-European New Zealander, I don't have a culture. I'm uncultured. I am a swine. And, there's an aspect of that. So, I think that's what, in my opinion, is the augury of the hornet for New Zealand. That's just my opinion. I just chucked that out there just because Mr. Wasp came in to bother me, and I think he's still crawling on my back, but just, the show will go on. It's not the end of the world. It's just a wasp. But me no like wasp sting. Wasp sting very owie, then very itchy for a long time. Long time. Oh my god. So itchy. Okay. I have been blah blah blahing for way too long. But hey, just these things are really interesting. I think animals, insects, colors and numbers, we are surrounded by symbol. And not to be like, oh, symbolism, very important, very important. It's not about that it's important. It's part of who we are, man and woman as symbol. And there's more to it than just meets the eye. Because we are, not to be all Mr. Animist, but, in a way I guess I am, that we are all connected, and what we see is part of ourselves. And there's a story in that. There's a message in that. There's a communication in that. A connection to be made in that. Yeah. So, in recent news, 9 years ago, which is recent, in my world of fairy tale research, this is very recent. Warning, this article is more than 9 years old. Oh my goodness, let's not read it then. No, we're going to read it. Fairy tales are much older than previously thought. This is the most important article I have read in terms of fairy tale stuff, and this journey that I'm sharing with you, okay? And we'll soon find out why. A study of fairy story origins traces some back thousands of years, with one tale dating back as far as the Bronze Age. And there we have on the screen what a cool illustration. Oh well, I recommend you look at that. Beauty and the Beast. Let's go full screen. There we go. Don't know if that came up. Yes. So Beauty and the Beast is pretty old, guys. And Rumpelstiltskin is traced back to prehistory. Fairy stories such as Beauty and the Beast and Rumpelstiltskin can be traced back thousands of years to prehistoric times, with one tale originating from the Bronze Age, academics have revealed. Using techniques normally employed by biologists, they studied common links between 275 Indo-European fairy tales from around the world and found some have roots that are far older than previously known, and long before the emergence of the literary record. Okay, so this is very Brothers Grimm-esque in terms of, what the Grimm's brothers say of fairy tales. While stories such as Beauty and the Beast and Rumpelstiltskin were first written down in the 17th and 18th century, the researchers found they originated significantly earlier. Both tales can be securely traced back to the emergence of the major Western Indo-European subfamilies as distinct lineages between 2,500 and 6,000 years ago, they write, which is fantastic news. That is 9 years old, but that's okay. Durham University anthropologist Dr. Jamie Terrani, who worked with folklorist Sara Graça da Silva, from New University of Lisbon, believed the research published in the Royal Society Open Science Journal has answered a question about our cultural heritage. These stories have been told since before even English, French, and Italian existed, says Dr. Jamie Terani. In the 19th century, Wilhelm Grimm of the Brothers Grimm believed many of the fairy stories they popularized were rooted in a shared cultural history dating back to the birth of the Indo-European language family. But later thinkers challenged that view, as in almost all the books on fairy tale origins since, almost all, not all of them, but lots. But later thinkers challenged that view, saying some stories were much younger and passed into oral tradition, having first been written down by writers from the 16th and 17th centuries. Yes, I mean, we weren't there, but storytelling has been a big thing, a popular thing. In the 16th and 17th centuries, even Middle Ages, all around then. Even 18th century, telling stories. It was a pastime and a form of entertainment, and it was just always part of that culture. So I can see how people would argue into that or lean into that. Because there was also, the other thing is like that they were rude. They were like parlor stories, watered down. But maybe the rude stories were fairy tales spiced up. I don't know. Da Silva told The Guardian that the origin of folktales was one of the biggest mysteries in folktale studies. Yes. And origins of man is one of the biggest mysteries. Look at all the arguing about that online. There's the intervention theory, that we are hybridized from monkey descendants, that Anunnaki kind of thing, which I don't know very much about. And then there's just the Darwinian thing, that we just from monkeys, that's it. Then there's just that, just that Abrahamic God, magic wand, boom, there's man. That's how it is. And yeah, it's a mystery, right? And I think the mystery of the origin of folktales is in line with the mystery of the origin of man. And I think as man became, folktale became. Because, well, I mean, it's like it doesn't really say anything, does it? But it's probably what it is. Da Silva told in the sense that I don't know if it's really everything, that the origins, everything. Like, we do have to look back to learn about moving forward. But the looking back to find the exact pinpoint and all that sort of thing, maybe that's not really the holistic way to be looking back, right? To just argue about exactly this is how it was. We can think about different theories and how that could inform moving forward, right? We can, walk and chew gum at the same time kind of thing, perhaps. But at the same time, some people are just interested in going down rabbit holes, and that's okay. Look at this rabbit hole, we're going down here. Da Silva told The Guardian that the origin of folktales was one of the biggest mysteries in folktale studies, with its reconstruction often frustrated not only by difficulties in defining the genre, but also as a result of the rich interplay between oral and written traditions. Yes, which is really the problem that everyone says of finding the truth. The new method of mapping the stories through common languages and geographical proximity worked, because in oral tradition, folk tales are transmitted through spoken language, so a correlation might be expected, and also because both languages and folk tales are transmitted from generation to generation. Terani said their study agreed with Grimm's theory. Some of these stories go back much further than the earliest literary record. Just one moment. A dead spider just fell on me. There you go. Okay, bye-bye, Spider. Anyway. Had me bugging out. So I just thought it was like a dead wasp just dropped on me or something. It was just getting a bit weird. All right. I'm really in a cave, guys. Like, it's just almost pretty much a cave. Oh, dear. Living the high life down here. Right. Yes, generation to generation. Tirani said their study agreed with Grimm's theory. There it is. This big study agreed with Grimm's theory. So perhaps it wasn't a theory after all. So now my view, like my view of where the Grimms are coming from was already highly regarded, but it was like, I don't know, I guess I probably didn't have enough faith in it. I had faith in it, but I want some more rock solid stuff, right? To be able to like publish, things that have more weight for skeptical people, because we got to change the minds of people and get people to bring fairy tale back. And so, I didn't think that an article from The Guardian would help me at all whatsoever with this, but so here we go. The study agreed with Grimm's theory. Some of these stories go back much further than the earliest literary record, and indeed further back than classical mythology. Some versions of these stories appear in Latin and Greek texts, but our findings suggest they are much older than that. Analysis. So Little Rabbit says that would be a long time ago. Yeah, very long time ago. Indo-European language family been around far longer than I dare say of these people. Yeah. Yeah, so it's kind of like once they're going to the Bronze Age, it's kind of like opening up a new door, right? Of like time immemorium. Yeah, it's crazy. It's like it's mind-blowing, man. Yeah. So the study employed. Oh, wait. Analysis showed Jack and the Beanstalk was rooted in a group of stories classified as The Boy Who Stole Ogre's Treasure, and could be traced back to when Eastern and Western Indo-European languages split. More than 5,000 years ago. Beauty and the Beast and Rumpelstiltskin to be about 4,000 years old. A folktale called The Smith and the Devil was estimated to date back 6,000 years to the Bronze Age. Yeah, so Jack and the Beanstalk, that's one I really want to... Well, I've done some stuff on, and I want to stick with that. And we're sticking with Snow White. We'll look into a few things soon. Hopefully, if we have time. Yeah, so The Boy Who Stole the Ogre's Treasure classification. That's 5,000 years. And that's a self-defense type story. Big bad people, and you got to do something about it. And if you think of, the sacred masculine principle being one of the, two pillars of Freemasonry, well, I think that concept of sticking up for yourself, as we were talking about the hornet and the wasp, symbolizing standing up for what's right. I hold that in a very high regard, not just because Freemasonry and Freemasonry is important or has a lot of successful people or whatever, but I think these mystery schools like it's a pillar in Freemasonry because it's foundational. And again, what we see in the early years is that foundation is not there, and it's a precursor to all the problems we see in the world. So I'm really sort of at this point satisfied that something like Jack and the Beanstalk is really a lesson, and a spiritual nourishment for that pillar, where it doesn't need to get too complicated for kids, but reading the original Jack and the Beanstalk to young children is, and this is anecdotal as well. I did the study after I got the experience reading Jack and the Beanstalk to kids, and it's like auguries happen when things are pertinent to the time. Things that need to be addressed collectively. And so 2025, reading Jack and the Beanstalk, yeah, it's a solution. It really is. Bringing back the original Jack and the Beanstalk, where the ogre comes down and kills everybody. Well, it kills a lot of people and kills the cows, eats the cows, and goes back up. The stories you get now, they skip that part. And I don't think it's that. I actually don't. I would say that actually the editing, you can only edit a story so much until you end up with, well, the 2025 Disney version of Snow White. Did that even get released? That was the most hated film of like the last 10 years, and it just came out. I don't think it even came out. It was that bad. Because they had to twist the story so much to make it work that you just couldn't have anything that really had anything to do with the actual story in it anymore. So it wasn't the story. So I do think that, like, if the story has a few edits in there, I don't actually think it's that bad. I think it's bad, but I don't think it's like everything hinges on the first part of the story. I think it's just so easy to be disrespected, a story. It's so easy for someone to just come along and say, well, I don't think that I like that, so we're not going to give that to the children. Rip that page out. So it's like a lack of respect for our own history, a lack of respect for our own past. I think it really just comes down to that. All right. And obviously lack of shadow work in adults. Why are they doing that? What are they projecting onto others with that action? All right. Beauty and the Beast and Rumpelstiltskin, 4,000 years old. A folktale called The Smith and the Devil, dating back to 6,000 years to the Bronze Age. We must look at that. I don't think I have read that one on The Secret Kindergarten. The story, which involves a blacksmith selling his soul in a pact with the devil in order to gain supernatural ability, then tricking the evil power, is not so well known today, but its theme of a Faustian pact is familiar to many. The study employed phylogenetic analysis, which was developed to investigate evolutionary relationships between species, and used a tree of Indo-European languages to trace the descent of shared tales on it to see how far they could be demonstrated to go back in time. Tehrani said, "We find it pretty remarkable that these stories have survived without being written. They have been told since before even English, French and Italian existed. They were probably told in an extinct Indo-European language." Yeah, it is remarkable. I don't think it should be. Does that make sense? I don't think it should be remarkable that people, I don't know, before we had the technology that we have, or any of the technology that we have, probably, that, they told stories and they survived. Rhetorical question here. Think back to when you were when you were 5 years old, 6 years old, and you were at school, and the the songs that you would sing in the yard, in the schoolyard, the games that you would play in the schoolyard, they were just there, right? And they've been there since schoolyards have been there, right? Sure, they can be traced back and they're kind of newer, but they're just in the fabric of life. And all the way back then, well, perhaps we were more in touch with that, more connected with these things. And it was just what is and what was and how it is. And in that sense, it wouldn't have been very remarkable at all. Anyway, De Silva believes the stories endure thanks to the power of storytelling and magic from time immemorial. Well, that's nice. I'm impressed that she said that. Besides, the motives present in fairy tales are timeless and fairly universal, comprising dichotomies such as good and evil, right and wrong, punishment and reward, moral and immoral, male and female. Ultimately, despite being often disregarded as fictitious, and even as a lesser form of narrative, folktales are excellent case studies for cross-cultural comparisons and studies on human behavior, including cooperation, decision-making, and so on. Yep, pretty cool. The author and academic Marina Warner, who has written a history of fairy tales, called this particular paper fascinating. What's interesting to me is it shows how deeply this creative power of the imagination lies in the human being, how it's about making sense of your world by inventing narratives that resist its difficulties, she said. In the case of the Smith and the Devil, it's a cunning tale, the trickster tricked, showing a very ancient version of that defiance of difficulty. That capricious chance will play tricks on you, but you, with cunning, will be able to resist that. It's a kind of joke the audience shares to feel a little better. And the trickster is an archetype, right? It's a Jungian archetype. And so, I say that just on its face value that, the Smith and the Devil, an important tale for kids as it feeds that awareness, that knowledge and that understanding of the dynamic of working with or protecting yourself against the shadow aspect of the trickster archetype which you will face in life. And I think probably that's really kind of enough said. I mean, for me, like this article was just like a penny's dropped for me, is what I'm saying. And it, kind of sad that it's like, well, I needed some, scientific studies or whatever, but otherwise you're kind of just saying things and everyone can just easily disagree with you just because you're just saying something that you think is right, which is the story of my life. All right, Beauty and the Beast, or The Animal Bride, shows a similar kind of imagining, she added. It's making sense of our relationship with the natural world, eliminating the threat. A beast figure marries a woman, and then the stories take different turns. In one, she kills him. In one, she finds he turns into a man when she kisses him. And I don't know why the article ended like that. Yeah. That's the end of the article. It's a bit odd. So here's a study. How are we for time? Okay, let's just go through a little bit of the study, guys. Just read the abstract. Ancient population expansions and dispersals often leave enduring signatures in the cultural traditions of their descendants. as well as in their genes and languages. The International Folktale Record has long been regarded as a rich context in which to explore these legacies. To date, investigations in this area have been complicated by a lack of historical data and the impact of more recent waves of diffusion. In this study, we introduce new methods for tackling these problems by applying comparative phylogenetic methods. We find correlations between the distributions of a number of folktales and phylogenetic, but not spatial, associations among populations that are consistent with vertical processes of cultural inheritance. Moreover, we show that these oral traditions probably originated long before the emergence of the literary record, and find evidence that one tale, The Smith and the Devil, can be traced back to the Bronze Age. On a broader level, the kinds of stories told in ancestral societies can provide important insights into their culture, furnishing new perspectives on linguistic, genetic, archaeological reconstructions of human prehistory. Just the thing I find interesting about this is, like, I do feel like a lot of these people that have, skin in the game of trying to figure out, like, the origins of fairy tales and the whole point of them, some of them, not all of them, but a fair number of them, I feel like they have a problem with the Brothers Grimm being like the authority on it. I think they have a bit of an issue in that the tone or the angle that they try to take is to kind of disprove the Grimms. And so I just think the study is just really interesting in that they kind of accepted that that essentially that the Grimm's brothers were right. So I don't know if it's just like the people doing the study were just like, well, that's the facts, and then everyone just had to eat their hat a little bit. I don't know. But I can't understand that map, but that's obviously around Europe. I just want to go to... Oh, there was one bit I wanted to read. We got time. Some of the discussion. I'll just read a bit. If it's not going anywhere, then... Our analyses of the distributions of tales of magic among Indo-European speaking populations bear out the observations of previous researchers concerning the complex spatial and historical patterning of the International Folktale Record. Nevertheless, they show that it is still possible to uncover deep signatures of common descent in the folktale traditions of related populations. Most of these cases, spatial proximity appears to have had a negative effect on the tale's distributions, suggesting that societies were more likely to reject than adopt these stories from their neighbours. Interesting. The latter finding contrasts with previous research that reports much stronger evidence for the spatial diffusion of folktales between neighbouring populations. And this, I think this kind of plays in a little bit to the collective unconscious. If we're being Jungian or whatever, that, in the sense like popular music, how many songs have like the 1, 4, 5 chord progression, for example, or other chord progressions. You'll find there's only a small handful, and I'm talking popular music. There's like a small handful of actual chord progressions that just, so someone might write a song and it could kind of sound the same as a song that someone else wrote, right? So I do think with fairy tales, one of my theories, and probably other people's theories, I'm not trying to claim to be super special or anything, but is that, someone comes up with a fairy tale and then someone else comes up with a fairy tale in a time where storytelling and story writing and that community, that importance of that necessity of story as entertainment and education and moral sustenance, spiritual sustenance was just part of life, the fabric of the life, that someone can create a story that ends up being in the same category as someone else coming up with a story. Does that make sense? But jumping the gun a little bit here, but yeah. A study by Ross found that similarities among European variants of the tale, the kind and unkind girls, because that's a classification of story, ATU 480, are correlated strongly with geographical proximity independently of linguistic relationships, but not vice versa. Okay, so there was a language barrier. Yeah, this is intriguing. Another more recent study by Ross and Atkinson suggests that the distributions of shared tale types among Arctic hunter-gatherer societies, white people, are predicted by both geographical and linguistic associations, with the former being more influential. Geographical being more influential. However, it's important to emphasize that we only compared spatial versus phylogenetic effects for tales that had already been screened for a phylogenetic signal in order to determine whether that signal was genuine. It is highly plausible that horizontal transmission played a much greater role in the tales whose distributions were not predicted by linguistic relationships in the D analyses, which included the kind and unkind girls classification, consistent with Ross et al.'s findings. This raises a more general question about why populations seem to readily adopt some tales from their neighbours while apparently rejecting others. Okay. Theoretical studies of cultural evolution suggest that patterns of cultural diversity are often shaped by parochial transmission biases, e.g. conformism and neophobia, that inhibit, well, yeah, I can believe that. Yes, that inhibit the exchange of information between groups and preserve local distinctions. Or there could have been just a Karen saying, oh no, we're not going to read that book. We're not going to say that story. However, relatively little work has examined the extent to which these biases target particular kinds of traits, or the circumstances under which they might be relaxed. Because it goes beyond Indo-Europe, right? The classifications of stories are global, and there are, stories from all over the world in the same classifications. So that's kind of where I was going with like the collective unconscious, or where I was coming from. All right, what's the time? 9 minutes to go. 9 minutes to the top of the hour. Ad break coming in 6 minutes. Wonder if yeah, talking a lot, and then I had 1 hour of Brothers Grimm, and then 20 minutes of the true origins of Snow White. Let's just start the true origins of Snow White. Disturbing true origins, because this one is way better than that other one I played. I think it was last week. So let's just get straight to this before the ads, so we don't miss out. Come on, Gino. Here we go.
You think you know Snow White, the jealous stepmother, the magic mirror, the 7 dwarfs, the poisoned apple. But the fairy tale you've been told is a lie that's been cleaned up over hundreds of years. The original story wasn't written to entertain children. It was written to warn them about a danger so real and so terrible that people couldn't speak about it directly. Today, we're uncovering the disturbing truth hidden in Snow White's story, a coded message about actual crimes that people in medieval Germany would have readily understood. And here's what will stick with you. Once you learn what the glass coffin really meant in medieval Germany, once you understand why the original villain was Snow White's actual mother, you'll realize this was never just a fairy tale. It was proof of something much worse. Let's begin. The version the Brothers Grimm first collected wasn't about a stepmother at all. In their original 1812 manuscript, the woman who orders Snow White's death, who demands her organs be cut out and delivered as proof, who then boils those organs in salt and eats them thinking she's consuming her own daughter's flesh. That woman was Snow White's biological mother. Picture the Grimms, writing by candlelight in their study in Castle, carefully transcribing what elderly peasant women had whispered to them. On the yellowed page, in Jacob Grimm's precise handwriting, appears the German word Die Mutter, not Stiefmutter, stepmother, simply Mutter, mother. The manuscript, preserved now in the Berlin State Library, shows no hesitation, no correction. This mother orders her huntsman to bring back her 7-year-old daughter's lungs and liver, and when he delivers what she believes are Snow White's organs, she doesn't just dispose of them. The text explicitly states, Der Koch musste sie in Salz kochen, und das boshafte Weib aß sie auf. The cook had to boil them in salt, and the wicked woman ate them up. She consumed them greedily, believing she was devouring her own child's essence. This wasn't a transcription error or a momentary lapse. Across Europe, from Russia to Ireland, folklorists have documented similar tales of maternal cannibalism, stories that emerged from very real fears about what mothers might do to daughters who threatened their position. The Grimms changed this detail in later editions, transforming the mother into a stepmother to make the story more palatable. But they couldn't erase what folklore scholars now recognize as the tale's true origin, a coded warning about infanticide and the very real dangers young girls faced within their own households during an era when a daughter's beauty could be seen as either an asset to be traded or a threat to be eliminated.
I have to step in and say something here. So there's, this is possibly, how Snow White presented itself back into the zeitgeist with this message being a warning for the culture that the Brothers Grimms were in at the time. Like, perhaps, but I mean, this theory, like, it's sort of when you look at these things, I feel like they're kind of confirmations to that idea. And then also how the Brothers Grimm changed the mother to the stepmother to make it more palatable. Well, that's where I was saying sort of changing the stories is, not great. But also, they were making it palatable for the adult to say, hey, we're going to read this to the kid, right? It can never be making it palatable for the kids. And, I'm keen to have that conversation with someone that's spent as much time with lots of kids, as much as time as me. Because there are people like that out there, so, come and let's have a chat about that. But I don't think that, I personally know that there's just, that decision's not for the kids, it's for the parents, to get the parents to keep reading the story, to preserve the story. So, altering, like twisting the story to make things more palatable is not, I don't think it's right. I don't think it's like the way to go. But also, they can't twist the minds of all the people that they want. You can't twist everybody's mind to go with what you want to do, right? So there's going to be some ebb and flow and some sway there. But at the end of the day, the story, the message in the story remains the same. One more minute.
But if the image of a mother devouring her child's flesh wasn't disturbing enough, the horror doesn't stop at the family table.
The horror doesn't stop at the family table. The devouring mother, as Jordan Peterson puts it too. So, yeah. Now we're getting somewhere, folks. This is Otherworld Connections on Revolution.Radio Studio A. Coming up to the ad break. Stick around and we'll see you on the other side. All right, this is Otherworld Connections. I'm Gino, and you're listening to Revolution Radio. Revolution.radio, I might add. And it's a listener-supported station. So yeah, please consider helping support our efforts and our airtime by visiting the station's donation section on our website, revolution.radio. There we go. So yeah, personally, I feel like we are getting somewhere with Snow White and with fairy tales themselves. It's an empowering show for me, so I'm glad to be sharing it with you, whoever you are, wherever you are. The disturbing true origins of Snow White from the channel The Lore Labyrinth. Let's just keep going.
What the Grimms captured was only the beginning of a far darker reality, one where daughters weren't just victims of jealousy, but pawns in a ruthless game of power, wealth, and survival. Consider the historical context that medieval audiences would have immediately understood. In the German territories where this tale originated, young noblewomen like Snow White were political pawns, their beauty determining their value in marriage alliances. But here's where the historical record becomes genuinely disturbing. When a young daughter's beauty surpassed her mother's, it could shift the balance of power within noble households. The mother's influence, derived from her ability to broker marriages and maintain court relationships, suddenly faced competition from her own bloodline. Take the case of Margareta von Waldeck, documented in Bavarian court records from the 16th century. At age 13, her sudden wasting illness occurred just weeks after her betrothal to a powerful duke, a match that would have elevated her above her mother's station. The court physician's notes, discovered centuries later in monastery archives, hint at symptoms consistent with mercury poisoning. Her mother inherited not only Margarita's dowry, but also the right to negotiate a new alliance with the spurned duke's family. No investigation was ever conducted. The father, who stood to gain significant lands from his wife's new negotiations, declared it God's will. Such cases weren't aberrations but patterns, whispered about in castle corridors, but never formally prosecuted, creating an atmosphere where every young noblewoman knew that her emerging beauty might mark her for death. The mirror in the story, that wasn't magical thinking to medieval listeners. The elaborate mirrors of noble households were genuine status symbols, costing more than entire estates. They represented not just vanity, but political power. The ability to maintain one's appearance was directly tied to maintaining one's position at court. When the mirror declares Snow White the fairest, it's not offering a compliment. It's pronouncing a death sentence, announcing a transfer of power that the queen cannot accept. And then we come to the huntsman, ordered to bring back Snow White's lungs and liver as proof of death. Modern readers miss the devastating significance of these specific organs. In medieval German folklore, the lungs were believed to contain the breath of life, the very essence of youth, while the liver housed the soul's vitality. The queen doesn't just want Snow White dead, she wants to consume the physical sources of her daughter's beauty and youth. The text explicitly states she boils them in salt and eats them, engaging in a ritual that anthropologists have identified in multiple cultures as symbolic vampirism. The belief that consuming another's organs transfers their qualities to the eater. But the truly brilliant horror of this tale emerges when you examine what happens after Snow White escapes. Snow White doesn't flee to safety. She enters servitude with 7 men in the forest. The Grimms were careful to call them dwarfs, but folklore historians have uncovered something far more unsettling. In the Hessian regions where the Grimms collected their tales, historical records from the 16th and 17th centuries document the extensive use of child labor in mining operations. Children as young as 7 were sent into mines because their small bodies could navigate narrow tunnels. They were called Kleinenbergleute, literally small mountain people, which the Grimms translated as dwarfs. Imagine children no older than Snow White herself, crawling on hands and knees through passages barely wider than their shoulders, their lungs burning with coal dust and toxic fumes. The mining archives from Siegen, dated 1618, describe boys and girls who entered the mines at 7 and, if they survived, emerged permanently stunted, their growth arrested by malnutrition and the crushing weight of the earth above them, their spines curved from years of crouching in 3-foot-high tunnels, their skin, deprived of sunlight, turned the pallor of mushrooms. At night, these child miners slept in communal barracks, hidden deep in the forest, far from the towns whose wealth they dug from the earth. Local girls, often runaways or orphans themselves, would keep house for these communities in exchange for protection and shelter. When Snow White arrives at the cottage and immediately begins cooking and cleaning for 7 small men who work all day and return covered in grime, contemporary audiences would have recognized this arrangement instantly. The 7 dwarfs weren't magical beings. They were society's most exploited children, and Snow White had joined their ranks, trading domestic servitude for survival. The 3 murder attempts that follow reveal an escalating pattern that modern criminologists recognize as classic predatory behavior. First, the queen arrives disguised as a peddler woman selling bodice laces, seemingly innocent items that she uses to suffocate Snow White by lacing her too tightly. When that fails, she returns with a poisoned comb, a more direct attack on Snow White's beauty itself. Finally, the apple, red on one side, white on the other, poisoned on the red side. The queen eats the white half to prove it's safe, then watches as Snow White bites into the red portion. That apple deserves special attention because it connects to one of the most chilling aspects of the historical record. In medieval Germany, there was a documented practice among those who dealt in poisons, the creation of what were called Judas fruits, apples or other fruits partially injected with poison, designed to kill slowly enough that the poisoner could establish an alibi. Picture a feast in the great hall of a Rhineland castle, circa 1485. The servants bring forth a silver platter bearing perfect red apples, their skins gleaming in the torchlight. The hostess herself selects one, cuts it with her own knife, and eats half while offering the other to her young rival. Hours later, long after the hostess has retired to her chambers with witnesses to her own good health, the victim begins to convulse. Her lips remain red, her skin stays fresh, but her body seizes into paralysis. The court physicians, examining her, find no obvious cause of death. The apple long since digested, the poisoner's alibi unshakable. These Judas fruits, named for the betrayer who shared bread with Christ before destroying him, were infamous enough that Italian diplomat Lorenzo de' Medici wrote warnings about them to his allies. The symptoms Snow White displays, immediate paralysis, preservation of her beauty, the appearance of death while potentially maintaining minimal life signs, match exactly the effects of concentrated belladonna extract derived from deadly nightshade plants that grew wild in German forests. The poison would cause the pupils to dilate, creating an appearance of beauty, the muscles to freeze, and the heart to slow to nearly imperceptible beats. The glass coffin where Snow White lies in suspended animation wasn't a fairy tale invention either. Noble families across Europe actually commissioned crystal or glass-topped coffins for young women who died under suspicious circumstances, particularly when questions of inheritance or succession were involved. The transparent coffin served a triple purpose. It proved the heiress was truly dead, preventing any rival claims that she had been hidden away. It displayed her beauty one final time, a morbid advertisement of the family's genetic stock, and it prevented anyone from examining the body too closely for signs of foul play. The glass created an impenetrable barrier between the victim and any who might question the cause of death. When Snow White lies in her crystal coffin, beautiful and untouchable, she joins a long line of noble daughters whose deaths enriched their families and whose bodies became public spectacles of private crimes. The glass coffin may have preserved Snow White's body as proof of death, but it also invited something far worse. By turning her into a permanent display, the tale sets the stage for an even more unsettling consequence: the arrival of a prince whose fascination isn't with life, but with beauty frozen in death. In the Grimm original, Snow White isn't awakened by true love's kiss. A prince becomes obsessed with her corpse, yes, her corpse, and convinces the dwarfs to give him the glass coffin. He has his servants carry it everywhere he goes, and when they stumble, the jostle dislodges the apple from her throat. She awakens not from love, but from pure accident, after being treated as an object of necrophilic obsession. The wedding that follows brings us to the tale's final revelation of justice that would have resonated with medieval audiences in ways we've forgotten. The evil queen is forced to dance in red-hot iron shoes until she dies, a punishment that wasn't fantasy, but historical fact. This specific execution method was reserved in medieval law for one particular crime, matricide or attempted matricide. This wasn't just capital punishment. It was a theatrical display meant to demonstrate that certain crimes violated the natural order so fundamentally that they required supernatural levels of retribution. When the evil queen faces this fate in Snow White, every listener would have understood. Her crime was recognized as the most heinous possible, the destruction of one's own bloodline, and the tale was granting her the justice that real mothers who murdered their daughters so rarely faced. Maria Tatar, the Harvard folklorist who spent decades studying the brothers Grimm manuscripts, made a discovery that transforms our entire understanding of this tale. In the margins of their working notes, the brothers had written Schneewittchen, Machnung und Warnung, Snow White, reminder and warning. This wasn't meant to be entertainment. It was meant to be a cautionary tale, encoding real dangers that young women faced, preserving knowledge of actual crimes that were too horrible to speak of directly. The tale even embeds a sophisticated understanding of what we now recognize as intergenerational trauma. The magic mirror doesn't just reflect physical beauty, it reflects the queen's psychological state, her inability to see her daughter as anything but competition. Modern psychologists studying the tale have noted that the queen's behavior follows the pattern of what we now call malignant narcissism, the inability to tolerate being surpassed, even by one's own children. But the Grimms understood this centuries before psychology had a name for it. They preserved, in symbolic form, a warning about mothers who would rather destroy their daughters than see them flourish. And once you understand that the Grimms were encoding a warning rather than spinning a bedtime story, the smallest details of the tale take on a terrifying new weight. Even the numbers themselves were chosen with precision, carrying legal and spiritual meanings that medieval audiences would have recognized instantly. 7 dwarfs, 3 murder attempts, 1 apple divided in 2 halves. These weren't random choices. In medieval numerology, 7 represented completion or perfection, 7 deadly sins, 7 virtues, suggesting Snow White's time with the dwarfs was a complete cycle of hiding. 3 attempts indicated a fairy tale pattern, yes, but also matched legal precedent. Under Germanic law, 3 attempts at murder elevated the crime to high treason when the victim was of noble blood. The bifurcated apple, white and red, safe and poisoned, embodied the duality the entire tale explores. The mother who should protect, but instead destroys. The beauty that should be celebrated, but instead incites murder. The home that should be safe, but becomes the source of greatest danger. But perhaps the most devastating detail is one that appears in the earliest versions, but was gradually edited out. Snow White's age. In the 1812 version, she's 7 years old when her mother first tries to kill her. 7. The same age at which children entered servitude in the mines. The same age at which, under medieval law, a girl could be betrothed. The same age at which, according to court records from the period, young girls of noble birth begin to appear in historical documents as victims of mysterious illnesses or accidents that benefited their mother's political positions. This wasn't a story about a teenager threatened by her stepmother's vanity. This was about systematic child abuse, encoded and preserved in a form that could be safely transmitted through generations. The brothers Grimm, as legal scholars, would have seen the court records. They would have known about the investigations that never went anywhere, the young girls who disappeared or died under suspicious circumstances, the mothers who inherited their daughters' dowries or marriage prospects. They took that horrific reality and wrapped it in just enough fantasy to make it tellable, but left enough truth that anyone who knew where to look could see the warning underneath. The forest where Snow White flees isn't just a physical location. It's a psychological space representing the nowhere that existed for young women who fled abusive households. They couldn't return home. They couldn't seek legal protection, as their fathers or mothers were their legal guardians, and they couldn't survive alone. The mining communities represented one of the few places where questions weren't asked, where a young woman could trade labor for protection, where the authorities didn't venture. The brothers Grimm preserved this underground railroad of the medieval period, hidden in plain sight as a fairy tale cottage. Even the seemingly innocuous detail of Snow White's coloring, skin white as snow, lips red as blood, hair black as ebony, encoded a warning that would have been crystal clear to medieval audiences. These weren't just poetic descriptions. They were the exact features that marked a young woman as valuable in the marriage market of medieval Germanic courts. The specific combination marked her as having noble bloodlines, the pale skin indicating she didn't work outdoors, youth and health, the red lips, suggesting vitality, and fertility, black hair being associated with youth, as it would grey with age. Snow White is marked from birth as a valuable commodity, and her tale shows how that very value makes her a target. But beauty wasn't just a death warrant in the marriage market. It seeped into every gesture of daily life. Nowhere is this more chilling than in the moment when what's supposed to be a symbol of a mother's tender touch becomes a deadly weapon. The poisoned comb that the Queen uses in her second murder attempt deserves particular attention. Combs in medieval noble households weren't simple grooming tools. They were intimate objects, often passed from mother to daughter, carrying familial significance. A mother combing her daughter's hair was a daily ritual of bonding and care. By transforming this symbol of maternal love into a weapon, the tale makes explicit what it has been suggesting all along, the complete perversion of the mother-daughter relationship, where every gesture of care might be an attack in disguise. Folklorists have found versions of Snow White across cultures, from Italy to Africa to Malaysia, but the German version collected by the Grimms is unique in its systematic encoding of specific medieval dangers. The Italian version, The Young Slave, has the girl fall into enchanted sleep, but lacks the cannibal mother. The Scottish version has the stepmother as villain, but omits the mirror entirely. Only the German version combines all these elements into a comprehensive warning system about the dangers young noblewomen faced within their own families. Other cultures told their own versions of the tale, but none carried the same deliberate brutality as the German variant. And that's because the Grimms weren't just recording folklore. They were preserving fragments of real crimes hidden inside a fairy tale. The academic Victoria Duda's recent analysis of the Grimm manuscripts revealed something extraordinary. Marginal notes suggesting the brothers were actively collecting testimonies from elderly women who claimed to remember true versions of the tale from their grandmothers. These oral histories, fragments of which survive in university archives, consistently emphasize the same elements: the mother, not stepmother, as villain, the specific organs demanded as proof of death, the mining communities as refuge, and most chillingly, insistence that this happened or this was real. The Grimms weren't just collecting folklore, they were preserving testimony, encoding historical crimes into a narrative that could survive where legal documents might be destroyed. The transformation of this tale into children's entertainment represents one of the most successful acts of historical erasure ever accomplished. Each adaptation moved further from the source material's darkness. The Disney version, released in 1937, eliminated every one of the tale's warning elements. The mother became unambiguously a stepmother. The dwarfs became comic figures. The prince's necrophilic obsession became true love's kiss. And Snow White herself transformed from a 7-year-old abuse victim into a singing teenager. The sanitization was so complete that modern audiences have no idea they're watching a story that originally documented systematic child abuse and attempted filicide. Yet the darkness persists, even in sanitized versions. Children instinctively recognize something wrong with the tale. They ask why the mother wants Snow White dead, why she has to live with strangers, why the prince falls in love with someone he thinks is dead. These questions point to the cognitive dissonance created when a horror story is disguised as a fairy tale. The darkness bleeds through because it's structural to the narrative. You can't remove it without the story collapsing entirely. Beneath the glittering symbols lies a record of real dangers young women faced in medieval households, where innocence could be weaponized against them and beauty could become a death sentence. The mirror, the poisoned apple, the glass coffin, these weren't playful inventions for children. They were symbols of power, control, and violence, drawn from a world where daughters were pawns in political games and, too often, victims of the very mothers meant to protect them. The Grimms, trained as legal scholars, knew the court records, knew the whispered accounts, and wrapped those horrors in just enough fantasy to ensure their survival through centuries of retelling. That's why the tale endures. It isn't because of dwarfs or romance. It's because its DNA carries a truth too terrible to speak plainly. The greatest threat to a child might come from within her own home. Snow White isn't a bedtime story. It's a crime scene, preserved in narrative form, evidence disguised as entertainment. And once you recognize what you're really reading, the illusion collapses. The fairest of them all was never about beauty. It was about a child marked for death, her story buried in symbols so it could outlive the crime itself.
Yes, so I don't think that. What am I trying to say? I mean, they didn't say that you shouldn't read it, right? But I feel like it's kind of inferring that people don't know what they're reading, and that could be true of like all fairy tales, right? But yeah, more research required. But I think this is a big lead. I'm curious as to where they found out about this stuff from. But yeah, and calling them actual crimes, like sure, actual crimes going on in medieval Germany, but obviously it speaks to a wider dynamic. And then I do think again of the work that Revolution Radio's Catherine Waters does on the family industrial complex, and her blowing the whistle on systemic child abuse in the institutions and society and the family and so on and so forth. And it does remind me of the Marquis de Sade's 120 Days of Sodom, which is more, I think, the 17th century. Which I know is not medieval, but these are all stories of essentially institutional evil and child abuse, right? And if a child were to ask why, if you were to read Snow White, and the child was to ask, why does the mum want to kill her daughter? Then the strategy always with young children is, well, why do you reckon? I don't know. Why do you reckon? It's not about answering questions of children. It's about really getting them to consider answering these questions. All questions. It's child-led, child-focused. Way to go. All right. Let's move to, with precisely half an hour to go, let's just go into The Brothers Grimm, More Than Fairy Tales, Germany's storytelling rebels. So I'm starting to see that they really did have a conscience. They knew about esoteric stuff, potentially Rosicrucians, and they wanted to revive fairy tales. Question mark about when Snow White began. But maybe they found the correspondence. I don't know if that last video was inferring that they wrote Snow White, but Snow White may not be the 7,000-year-old story that Rumpelstiltskin is what I'm saying. So that's where we're at now. So yeah, let's, keep getting a feel for who the Brothers Grimm really were by just, watching anything that I can find on the Brothers Grimm. So here we go.
Once upon a time, there were two brothers, united for life by their passion for literature and their study of language. Wilhelm and Jakob Grimm. Their name is mostly connected with their fairy tales, those wonderful stories of ugly witches and brave girls, of young princes and great dangers. It was the Grimms who first made German folk tales into the world literature they are today. These Grimm's fairy tales take us back to Germany in the 19th century. The country, not yet unified, consists of numerous small states, like the Kingdom of Hanover, where the Grimms are living in 1837.
Dahlmann verspätet sich.
Ich bitte dich, Jakob, die Glocken läuten noch. Es ist gerade 6 Uhr vorbei.
Also wenn er nicht gleich erscheint, gehe ich zurück an meinen Schreibtisch.
Nun gib es doch endlich zu. Auch du hast Freude an unseren Treffen. Ich habe ein kleines Lustspiel eingeübt, das ich vorführen werde. Ich bin gespannt, welches Gedicht Dahlmann ausgewählt hat.
Yeah, hopefully you can see the subtitles. If this whole thing's in German, obviously we're going to give it a rest. Let's see. Let's find out.
Das war ein einmaliges Brüderpaar, wobei Wilhelm eben der eloquentere, der charmantere, der Gesellschaftstyp war, der auch bei Frauen sehr gut ankam, soweit die Urteile reichen, während Jakob Grimm dieses Thema überhaupt nicht interessiert hat. Das waren alles Dinge, die ihn nur gestört hätten in seiner Wissenschaft.
Hier.
Okay, good news is that this looks very informative. Bad news is it's mostly in German. So, with half an hour to go, we'll leave it. I will watch that in my own time. And now I will... I think I might read this. Yeah, so this is from inspirethemind.org. I just want to go to About Us. It's a digital magazine that focuses on the intersection between mental health, science, and society. I don't know anything about the website. I just searched for information on fairy tales, right? The diverse group of writers, and the vision is to bring a different perspective from other mental health magazines, viewpoints of clinicians, researchers, and others working within mental health. Okay. So that's cool. And interesting about this is that it's the magic of fairy tales. So they're repping the scene. So let's have a look with International Children's Book this past Sunday, the 2nd of April. This was written in 2023, 5th of April. The research psychologist side of me was inspired to write an article about the role of fairy tales in children's development. I'm just going to move that page over, actually. There we go, that's better. Fairy tales provide a framework for how to deal with the challenges and conflicts of growing up, and psychologists and psychoanalysts have long described their importance on a child's emotional and social development. Why fairy tales? Would it not work the same if we just talked to our children? Well, it depends on their age. Young children around 3 to 4 years of age experience fairy tales as real, and not only would struggle to understand their meaning verbally, they would likely struggle to act them out. At my opinion, perfect time for fairy tales, because that's where they're getting their meaning from. That is the meaning of them. It's all upside down world. At ages 6 to 7, children tend to perceive fairy tales as to make believe. Somewhere in between, there is a perfect balance between the experience of the reality of the story and its make-believe side, which allows children to enact the story and the feelings they experience as part of it. I don't think they worded that paragraph very well. In his book, The Uses of Enchantment, the meaning and importance of fairy tales, which we've done some readings of, Bruno Bettelheim, a prominent psychoanalyst, talks about the importance of vicarious learning through characters' stories, in particular when it comes to dealing with one's own anxieties or fears. Such implicit and not conscious learning helps a child resolve their internal conflicts in a safe and developmentally appropriate environment without feeling overwhelmed. And I think there's an internal conflict that's at a soul level, Rudolf Steiner talks about, especially in young children. A developmental soul development conflict that goes on, and it's considered a great battle. And fairy tales play a part in winning whatever those battles that need to be won. So, this is going back to the reading. Let me give you an example. All children struggle with difficult emotions and internal conflicts, such as jealousy or anger. When first experienced, a young child does not have the capacity to understand these concepts symbolically, and as such to name them. Instead, they may feel a surge of uncomfortable emotions, and one way to make sense of them is to visualize them as something bad or scary, often in the form of monsters or witches, which is why people often don't want to read these kind of stories to young children, because they're deemed scary. This visual representation speaks to their imagination. It is developmentally appropriate. As such, by identifying with the struggles of, for example, Cinderella, Prince Cinders, or Snow White, and living through their stories, a child can process their own emotions and learn that these can be resolved. For example, in this case, rivalry and feeling inadequate or struggling to fit in. Through creative imagination, fairy tales facilitate the journey toward autonomy and independence. One such story is that of Goose Girl, a princess who was taken advantage of by others as she set off on a journey without her mother. She struggles to stand up for herself until eventually she does, and all ends well for her as justice is served. According to Bettelheim, it is going through the motions of injustice and anger together with the character that facilitates developmental growth. He compares the fairy tale to the folk tale, the little engine that could. And whilst both conclude with the hopeful ending where good prevails, only the stories that take us through the whole journey of good and evil will have a meaningful impact, because they can resonate with a wider range of emotions experienced by every child. In Goose Girl, these are feelings of exclusion, injustice, anger, struggles of becoming independent, and eventually a triumph once the evil is punished and autonomy gained. A different route to independence is also told in the story of Hansel and Gretel by the Brothers Grimm. Here, little siblings learn that greed won't get them far, and that it is through cooperation and selfless acts that they can win against the evil witch and embrace self-growth. Fairy tales and coping with adversities, which is the way we're the way I'm leaning towards the necessity of fairy tales in life, being told within the family and around young children, to young children. Fairy tales are also used in therapeutic environments. Right, middle mouse click on that. Okay, there's another few studies there, citations. Okay. They help process difficult emotions in safe and meaningful ways. For example, one study showed that children hospitalized in the oncology ward benefited from a fairy tale workshop in a number of ways. For example, through identifying with Snow White, they channeled their feelings of anger which they experienced as an aftermath of their illness toward the evil stepmother who symbolized the illness, intrusive treatments, or medical staff that put them through those treatments. Other stories like The Three Little Pigs helped children explore their anxieties about their sickness, which was symbolized by the wolf. It is also therapeutic for children to identify with the negative characters, as it can help them release the negative feelings they are experiencing, including anger, fear, or feeling threatened. And I think these are part of why fairy tales are necessary, is like the overcoming of evil, that it's possible, and experiencing the possibility of that. Fairy tales can serve a mirror function. A study on eating disorders showed that it was easier to face and talk about one's own difficulties when these were attributed to a fairy tale character as opposed to oneself. Through the character's victories, it was also possible to overcome one's own struggles. As such, fairy tales served as an external vessel to therapeutically work through one's own struggles and find resolutions to them. Fairy tales in modern times. Although old fairy tales carry universal teachings that can be applied in modern times, as they talk about the experiences of growing up, some of them might feel out of date. One such example is that of gender stereotyping, where female characters are often portrayed as weak, passive, and waiting for their prince to save them, whereas men's characters are strong and heroic, which in itself is a topic for a whole other article. Yes, and many articles have been written on that. Feminism. Should I say neo-feminism? Well, I'm making an assumption, but that's where they tend to go when they start talking about that. But at the same time, I would say, like in Snow White, like, she obviously, was courageous, right? What she endured and how she managed in the forest. She was a naive person, but that doesn't symbolize, say, all women as naive. That doesn't work like that. Does that make sense? So yeah, funny, like, I mean, she obviously wasn't like the hero, but also the prince kind of didn't do much either, right? In a way. The hunter did a fair amount to try and save, well, his own behind and Snow White's. But anyway, I just think I just don't think this gender stereotyping thing boils down in the way that the critics of fairy tales in that regard, I just don't think it boils down in the way they want it to. And they just sort of start crowbarring this stuff in. It feels like even in this article that's just gone, what? It's just been crowbarred in. Luckily, more and more up-to-date fairy tales are being released, like Prince Cinders by Babette Cole. I was wondering what Prince Cinders was. Politically Correct Bedtime Stories by James Finn Gardner, and Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls by Elena. So they kind of just said fairy tales are good, but hang on a minute, they're a plot twist. Fairy tales are not good. We have to change them. My favorite bedtime story, Goldilocks and the Three Bears. And although it's an old tale, it conveys a message that I find relevant in current times. The journey of growing up, curiosity, experimenting, finding your own place, and most of all, finding a good balance in whatever it is that I do. And also, you just, I don't even know what the word is. Goldilocks was not a weak, passive character. Maybe that's why Goldilocks was your favorite story, but you just did an oxymoron. Finding your own place, most of all, finding a good balance in whatever it is that I do, sometimes work in progress. Although fairy tales play a part in facilitating emotional, social, and moral development, it is not the only way. So it's perfectly fine if you struggle to recall your favorite fairy tale. Or if you've never had one. All right. So Metal Rabbit says, I don't know. Sorry, typing over a cat. She inserts right at my keyboard. And mentions Justine by Marquis de Sade. The classic. Yeah, the classic. Indeed. I'll tell you, that was the beginning of my awakening, believe it or not. Salo. Pasolini's film, which is based off Marquis de Sade, an attempt to install a bit of hatred in society for fascists, as in actual fascism, fascists, as in Mussolini era World War II fascism. Yeah, that was the beginning of my awakening, believe it or not. Well, believe it, because if you've read Marquis de Sade, oh, it's Justine by, excuse me, I'm totally misread that. Yeah, so Justine by Marquis de Sade. I don't know if I want to read that, dude. Too bad they were slated to be named Grimm. Miserable language. Yeah. Yeah, funny, eh? Yeah, so I've missed the timeline there. Yeah, alright, so it's nasty. Yeah, but is it, Metal Rabbit, is it more nasty than 120 Days of Sodom? Tell me the truth. Without details. Here we go. Metal Rabbit is responding. We're going to find out. I've not read the whole thing. Yeah, you probably had to go to the toilet, as in to vomit, multiple times. But I could see where it was going. I have a copy. Okay. Yeah. So I guess I bring this up because Snow White, when we watch these videos of the real reason that Snow White, the real, like the de-occulting or the esoteric of the Snow White, in terms of, you know, just the abusive nature, the abusiveness of the devouring mother and, you know, killing children, eating children, all that sort of thing. It reminds me of, 120 Days of Sodom, which is 17th century. It might be 18th. No, it's not 18th century. It's either 16th or 17th century. It just reminds me of that. Going out into the forest, abducting children, taking them somewhere, and kind of eating them at best. So that's like, it just, you know, there's something in that, in like the dynamic, like of, I guess what I'm trying to say is with Snow White, that the lady in this last video we watched, from the Lore Labyrinth, is that like she's saying they kind of adapted the story. She avoided actually saying they wrote Snow White, but she's saying they kind of like crowbarred in, or just put in some actual present day, for them, medieval Germany, present day anecdotes and evidence, and just to make it like a warning of, hey, people, this is what's going on with children, and in the hopes that maybe, I'm guessing that, you know, when children could hear the story, they could be sort of informed to maybe deal with it or do something about it. So I guess, you know, the Brothers Grimm being sort of esotericists and, secret society type people, they're sort of, in a way, that's them doing their magic, right? Maybe in a way feeling helpless to do anything about it, but having a conscience or something, that was the best that they could do, was kind of work the tale to fit better what was going on in their society at the time. And then obviously just what I was saying trying to say at the beginning, just to circle back, is that it's obviously talking of an archetypal, like an actual dynamic that happens in reality and has been going on for some time. And then so the Jordan Peterson video that we watched a few weeks ago, or a couple of weeks ago, explicitly on Snow White as a sort of warning or a tale of the evil mother, the devouring mother, as like a warning. And so it's obviously some kind of a warning, and it could be just of the larger, just of the familiar, the evil mother in the familial dynamics. So that applies to everyone to keep an eye out for in life, and just an awareness of things going on with kids, abuses towards kids, that not all adults are the authority, and not all adults are like the God, or that sort of thing. And that is part of what we're raised to do, right? You go to the preschool and you must respect the teacher, and all the teachers and thing, and they're horrible people, and I wasn't the best all the time. Like, we're only human beings at the end of the day, but people put these people on a pedestal. I was put on a pedestal because I was a teacher by I guess parents that fell into that part of the system where all teachers should be revered because of what they do. But don't worry, they weren't all like that. Trust me. Oh dear. Okay, so rabbiting on with, no pun intended there, some cool information from Metal Rabbit. So there's a Justine book. And it sounds nasty. I don't know if I'm going to go there. Well, I'm going to have a look. But 120 Days of Sodom as a kind of picture of, it's not medieval, but, they're in the forest abducting children, go to a castle. Castles have a medieval thing about them, right? They're generally medieval. Snow White being a story of a culture. There we go. A story of a particular culture of child abuse and harm in high society. There we go. So more research kind of required. And there's also, just wanted to say, there's also Mr. Cryptrick in the chat, and there's also a Mad Painter in the chat. And it's not my chat, it's just the Revolution Radio chat. And I just like to do that. Looks like there's some, American football. Houston 23, Buffalo 19. Final score. Well, congratulations and commiserations to those of you out there. Here in New Zealand, it's cricket. It's all about the cricket, which has, funnily enough, been bringing people over from baseball to cricket. I don't know anything about baseball, but for whatever reason, baseball fans are coming across cricket and falling in love with it. Same, but different. Quite different. I don't know how cricket can be more exciting than anything, but somehow it is. Yeah. So, some people deem cricket to be more exciting than baseball. Yes, I'm just filling in these 4 minutes because that one I wanted to play was more German than I thought it was, as in being spoken in German. Yeah. So the whole point, just a little recap of what I'm doing here, is obviously I worked as an early childhood teacher. I kind of freaked out about, what about the children? And, as part of the awakening process. And I was an unqualified early childhood teacher in Auckland City for 5 years while I continued to do my research, and I found it spiritually fulfilling. It created growth in intuition, which is what I talk about in my work for the Secret Kindergarten for Grown-Ups, that, if you spend your time and best intentions with young children to try and get better outcomes for them, or to protect them, or to help them, or to just want them to do well, it's a test of your patience. And so this is just adult to child engagement advice. Because of Snow White, because of what bad people were doing. The bad people care more about the kids than we do, which kind of makes us, in a way, worse than them. And what I learned about is what you got spiritually out of, because that's why they're doing horrible things to kids, is for spiritual in the inverted sense, and that actually if you spend time in right action with the young children, it extends your patience, it grows and builds your patience, like if you're working out at the gym, and it grows and grows and grows, and so does your intuition, which is the reward for that. It very much is karmic, and it very much is like a quid pro quo thing when it comes to young children. We're talking 2 to 7 years old, and you get intuition out of that, and that's your kind of reward. And so you start to go down paths of studying about symbolism and animals, colors, numbers as sort of really fundamental things, fundamental symbols to learn about. And that's, in my opinion, a never-ending, journey of discovery. And so I've landed on fairy tales as sort of something in all of that, sequence of symbols that contain, in the way that they're good for kids, because we wonder about what's good for kids, like what, conscious parenting or conscious education or whatever, all that stuff. Like, what do we need to teach our kids? Well, for 2 to 7 years old, we don't want to be directly instructing our children, as in the young children of the world. That's surefire way for it all to go wrong. So one of the most important things to do if people want to be serious about quote-unquote educating young children is to read fairy tales. That's the whole point of this, and that's where I'm coming from. Yeah. Reading fairy tales and letting the child lead the way on what they want to do. But spending time reading fairy tales to kids is like, you don't want to be reading factual books to young children. You don't want to be. If they want to start exploring that stuff, then fine, but in their world, those things shouldn't really even be around. It should just be fantasy, myth, mystery, all of that sort of stuff. Fantasy, imagination, creativity, play. And if you want to engage with your kid in a way that's informative or educational, then the best way to do that is through reading fairy tales. And beyond that, let your kids or the kids lead the way, and get involved with them in whatever they want to do, painting, what have you. Numbers and educational stuff comes up in the process naturally, and that learning will happen anyway. But it's about play, letting the children lead the way, and get reading those fairy tales. The unexpunged editions of fairy tales are the food for the soul for humanity. And thank you so much for tuning in to Otherworld Connections. We've reached the end. So, yeah, thanks so much, and we'll see you at the next one. Take care, everyone.